Learn English through story. The Forbidden Embrace. In a remote village, nestled deep in the heart of a sprawling forest, there existed an ancient belief passed down through generations. The villagers of Arban believed in the spirits of the forest, beings of immense power that controlled the natural balance of life. They were feared and revered, and it was said that any mortal who dared to seek communion with these spirits would be cursed for eternity. The most dangerous of these spirits was known as engliah, the spirit of desire, whose touch could bring pleasure beyond imagination but at a cost so steep that few dared to speak of it. Engliah was often described as a figure of untold beauty, her form shifting between that of a woman draped in flowing robes of mist and a shadow barely visible through the thick fog of the forest. Her allure was said to be irresistible, and once someone had felt the pull of her presence, they would be drawn into the depths of the forest, never to return. For as long as anyone could remember, the people of Arban had adhered strictly to the warnings of the village elders: never enter the forest at night, never stray from the path, and never, under any circumstances, respond to the call of the spirits. But as with all ancient warnings, they eventually faded into whispers and stories meant to scare children. And in every generation, there was one who thought themselves immune to the old fears, one who believed they were beyond the reach of such superstitions. In this generation, that person was Lucien. Lucien was a young man in his late 20s, tall and handsome, with a curious mind that often led him into trouble. He had been raised on the stories of the spirits, just like everyone else, but he was far too practical to believe in such things. To him, the forest was just that, a forest. The stories of spirits were nothing more than cautionary tales to keep people in line, to make sure no one wandered too far from the safety of the village. It was an effective method of control, or so he thought. Lucien's doubt in the spirits had grown over the years, especially as he saw how the village's traditions held people back. The villagers remained content in their small, isolated world, afraid to venture out, afraid to question the rules. He despised that fear, and he had made up his mind that he would break free from it. The forest held no power over him, and one night, he decided to prove it. It was during the harvest festival, a time when the village celebrated the bounty of the year and honored the spirits that they believed had blessed the crops. But Lucien, as usual, stood on the outskirts of the festivities, watching the villagers dance and sing while he brooded over his thoughts. That night, under the cover of the moon and the flickering lanterns of the festival, Lucien slipped away from the celebration and made his way to the edge of the forest. The dense trees loomed before him, dark and impenetrable, but Lucien felt no fear. He was determined to show himself, and the village, that the old tales were nothing more than superstition. As he stepped into the forest, the world around him seemed to change. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the festival faded into the background. The trees towered above him like ancient sentinels, their branches twisting and curling in ways that made them seem alive. But Lucien pressed on, following a narrow path that wound deeper into the woods. He had walked for only a short time when he felt Ida's presence, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step he took. It was a sensation that wrapped around him like a soft caress, a warmth that contradicted the chill of the night air. Lucian paused, glancing around, but there was nothing to see except the thick darkness of the forest. "Just my imagination," he muttered to himself, though a small part of him wasn't so sure. He continued walking, but the feeling only intensified. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching him, waiting for him. And then he heard Ida's voice, soft and melodious, whispering his name, "Lucian." He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was unmistakably real, and yet it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He turned, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing around him except the trees. "Lucian." The voice called again, more insistent this time, and against his better judgment, Lucian responded, "Who's there?" He called, his voice sounding far more uncertain than he intended. The forest was silent for a moment, and then the voice answered, "I am the one you seek." Lucian's breath caught in his throat. He had come into the forest to prove that there was nothing here, that the stories of the spirits were false. But now, standing alone in the darkness, he was no longer sure. Something was here with him, something he couldn't explain. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. A soft laugh echoed through the trees, and the air around him shifted. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman, draped in flowing mist, her features ethereal and otherworldly. She was beautiful, in a way that defied description, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. There was no mistaking her identity. "Alira," Lucian whispered, feeling a surge of both fear and fascination. The spirit smiled, her lips curving in a way that sent a shiver down his spine. "You came to find me," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Why?" Lucian took a step back, but he found himself unable to tear his gaze away from her. I didn't believe in you. I thought the stories were just myths." Alira tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Many think that." "Until they hear my call." Lucian swallowed hard. He had come to the forest to prove a point, but now, standing in front of this impossibly beautiful and dangerous creature, he realized how foolish he had been. The stories had been right all along. "I don't want anything from you," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'll leave, and we'll forget this ever happened." Alira's smile widened, and she moved closer to him, her form gliding through the mist like a shadow. "You cannot leave now, Lucian. Not after you've answered my call." He tried to move, but his body refused to obey. It was as if an invisible force held him in place, binding him to the spot. Panic rose in his chest, but before he could say anything more, Alira reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers cold and soft. "You came seeking proof, and now you have it," she whispered. "But you will not leave unchanged." Lucian's heart raced as he felt the warmth of her touch spread through him. It was a feeling unlike anything he had ever known, or pleasure and pain intertwined, so intense that it nearly brought him to his knees. His mind screamed at him to run, to escape, but his body was lost in the sensation, consumed by the forbidden embrace of the spirit. "Let go," Alira whispered, her voice laced with a seductive power. "Give in to me, and I will show you desires beyond your wildest dreams." For a brief moment, Lucian considered it. The temptation was overwhelming, the promise of something far greater than the life he had known. But deep down, he knew the truth. The pleasure engliah offered was not without consequence. The stories had always warned of the price of her touch, a price that was too high to pay. With a surge of willpower, Lucien tore himself away from her, stumbling backward and gasping for breath. "No," he said, his voice shaking. "I won't." Engliah's smile faded, and her eyes darkened. "Foolish mortal," she hissed. "You think you can resist me?" Lucien didn't answer. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest as he raced through the forest, the sound of engliah's laughter echoing behind him. The trees seemed to close in around him, the path twisting and turning in ways he didn't remember. But he didn't stop, not until he burst through the edge of the forest and into the open air of the village. Panting and trembling, Lucien collapsed to the ground, his mind reeling from what had just happened. The village was still alive with the sounds of the festival, the people completely unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond the trees. In the days that followed, Lucien tried to forget what had happened in the forest, but the memory of engliah's touch lingered. He could still feel the pull of her presence, the whisper of her voice in the back of his mind. The villagers noticed a change in him, though they didn't know the cause. He was quieter now, more withdrawn, as if a part of him had been left behind in the forest. One evening, as Lucien sat alone in his home, he heard it again, the soft, melodic voice that had called to him in the forest. "Lucien." He closed his eyes, knowing that no matter how far he ran, he would never escape her. The forbidden embrace had marked him, and he would carry its shadow for the rest of his days. The moral of the story is that some temptations, no matter how alluring, come with consequences that far outweigh the pleasure they offer. Giving in to momentary desires can lead to a lifetime of regret, and there are forces in the world both within and beyond ourselves that are better left untouched. Sometimes, resisting temptation is the only way to maintain one's freedom and integrity. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.